And to start off, coming in with number 7, we have Goku fighting Vegeta on planet Earth. Now, when you think about this battle, the level of difficulty was rather huge, because the first thing that we have to consider is that the battle's on planet Earth, and obviously most battles are on planet Earth, but when you factor in that a battle is on planet Earth, you have a lot more pressure because, I mean, if you lose, the whole planet's gone too. That's not to say that Goku can't die if he's somewhere else, but it just adds a level of tensity to the situation. And when you also consider the fact that Vegeta was clearly outclassing Goku in the initial stages of the battle, Goku really stood no chance against Vegeta naturally. And he had to completely disobey what King Kai told him to in using the Kaioken, and he pushed himself further beyond for that specific moment. And in that moment specifically, he had to push himself into Kaioken times 3 to get an upper edge on Vegeta, and then he eventually had to go into Kaioken times 4 to ultimately get an even bigger edge and push Vegeta's Gallic gun away, which was going to decimate the planet, which goes back to what we were saying earlier, in fighting on the planet is actually making the situation a lot more tense in itself. And when you consider that and the fact that Vegeta eventually turned into a great ape, he literally had nothing, and Goku eventually lost this fight individually, and his friends had to come in and save him and bail him out with Goku's guidance. But ultimately, Goku's initial fight with Vegeta was definitely one of the greatest challenges he's ever had, and it was something that he wasn't able to accomplish on his own. And that takes us directly into moment number 6, where we have Goku's fight against Kid Buu. Now, the Kid Buu fight is a rather unique one, because this is also a situation where Goku was not victorious individually and required the help of basically the entire planet to essentially vaporize Kid Buu, plus Dende making a wish and bringing his power back so he could defeat him eventually. But when you look at the Kid Buu fight specifically, the level of difficulty in this fight is merely the type of being that Kid Buu is. When you consider the fact that Kid Buu can regenerate significantly faster than a character like Cell, and when you consider the fact that Kid Buu has a very, very unpredictable fighting style, and when you consider the fact that Goku had to use a form that was specifically draining his energy significantly just to even hold his own against Kid Buu, this is by far one of the greatest challenges that Goku's ever had, and it makes sense why he wasn't able to ultimately defeat Kid Buu individually when you consider that Kid Buu is such a monstrosity when compared to a lot of other villains in terms of his insane nature and his ability to just basically come back from nothing and be extremely durable at any moment's notice. And because of that, Kid Buu comes in at 6th place. But then we have to move on to Goku fighting Piccolo Jr. Now, the reason why this fight made the list is because, well, let's be honest as Dragon Ball fans, this was one of the greatest fights in Dragon Ball history. You could honestly argue that this was the greatest fight ever in Dragon Ball when you just look at it from a total perspective of how the battle just elevated and elevated. But specifically, when you look at Piccolo Jr., you have to look at the fact that this is a stronger version of King Piccolo, and Goku had to basically fight this fight where Piccolo Jr. basically just blasted him right in the chest and then basically started torturing him throughout the battle. And when you also factor in that Goku eventually had to learn how to fly during this fight itself, it just added a level of difficulty to this battle that we truly just hadn't seen for a while in Dragon Ball. And as a result of that, Goku fighting Piccolo Jr. is definitely one of the greatest challenges ever. And the other level of difficulty to this battle too is the fact that this entire fight took place when Goku was fighting in a tournament setting, which restricts his capabilities as compared to an open area where we would see Goku fighting a character like Cell, whereas originally when Goku was fighting Cell in the restricted Cell games, it had a different level of tension to it because, I mean, if Goku just got ringed out, Cell can just say, well, you got ringed out, let's just destroy this ring, which was ultimately one of the reasons why Cell destroyed the arena anyways. Now, when we move up onto our midpoint, we have Goku's battle against Beerus. Now, the reason why this fight made the list is strictly because of the fact that obviously Beerus was not a villain like other Dragon Ball villains, but he did have intentions to blow up planet Earth, so you could effectively call him a villain at this particular point in Dragon Ball relative to other characters. And when you also factor in that when Goku was fighting against Beerus you have to remember that he was using his Super Saiyan God powers, which is something that he had literally no experience with. He had no experience with God Ki, he had no experience fighting against an entity like Beerus, and when you also factor in that he had the entire fate of the planet on the line, Goku had to fight well enough to impress Beerus enough for him to not destroy the planet, which in itself was basically like Goku was fighting a villain. And even though Goku was ultimately not successful in defeating Beerus, he fought so valiantly that the entire planet Earth was spared and Beerus became a long-term ally to our heroes. So because of all of those reasons, Goku fighting Beerus is definitely one of the biggest challenges he's ever had, simply due to inexperience. And that takes us into our top 3, where we arrive at number 3 with Goku fighting against King Piccolo. Now, even though King Piccolo's obviously weaker than Piccolo Jr., there's some things that we also have to factor in. When Goku fought against King Piccolo, this was prior to him being trained by Kami and Mr. Popo, which ultimately helped him in fighting against Piccolo Jr. many years later. But when we factor in that Goku was specifically a kid when he was fighting against King Piccolo, he was basically all by himself because Tien was essentially out of commission. And when we factor in that Goku had to drink the sacred holy water, which was ultimately one of the most challenging things for him because he ultimately had to literally put his life on the line just for that power boost, this is definitely one of the most incredible things and challenges that Goku's done, especially because of the fact that he was ultimately successful in this endeavor. And he also had to fight this fight injured too, similar to what he had to do against Piccolo Jr., but he did it as a kid and he had to ultimately risk his life for the entire planet, and ultimately defeat the big bad, which was the biggest bad in Dragon Ball history specifically at that point in time. And for all of those reasons, Goku's fight against King Piccolo is definitely one of the biggest challenges that he's ever had to go through. And that takes us directly into number 2, where we have the Tournament of Power. Now, obviously, there were so many battles that Goku had throughout the Tournament of Power. I mean, you can say the Jiren fight, you can say a bunch of other things. The Kefla fight, the first Jiren fight, you know, battles against other characters, but ultimately we're ranking them all as one ultimate moment, because when you think about the level of mental toughness that Goku had to have to fight in the Tournament of Power, when you consider the fact that he literally doesn't really have any time to rest. He has to constantly fight against multiple fighters at multiple different points, and he was ultimately the one that had to fight the strongest character from the opposing universe. And obviously Goku wasn't successful in defeating Jiren alone. He obviously required the help of Frieza and Android 17 to ultimately get it done. But from a battle standpoint, this was one of Goku's greatest challenges ever, because the mere fact that he was even able to survive for so long, albeit with the help of his friends, is truly one of the most incredible things that he's ever had to go through in Dragon Ball, outside of our number 1 spot, which is Super Saiyan Goku versus Frieza. Now, you definitely saw this one coming, because I don't think anybody can truly make a serious argument for anything else other than this moment. When you factor in that Goku had already fought Frieza, pushing himself very similar to how he did against Vegeta by going into even higher levels of Kaioken and pushing his body to the absolute maximum. When you factor in that Goku was battle fatigued, he was injured, he just fired a spirit bomb and was completely gassed, and when we also factor in that Goku could even barely move, and then, out of nowhere, Frieza basically kills Krillin, and based off of the adrenaline of Frieza killing Krillin and becoming a Super Saiyan, Goku would ultimately go through the biggest challenge of his life by having to fight an even more powerful version of Frieza, because not only did he have to fight against Frieza in the form that he was before, but he sat there and allowed Frieza to power up into his 100% final form, and ultimately had to fight an even more powerful version. So when you factor all of that in, plus the planet is about to be destroyed, he has to make sure and secure that his friends and family are going to get off safely, and he has the entire faith of the entire universe on the line. What Goku did against Frieza is nothing short of incredible. Now, obviously, the battle didn't end in the most traditional type of way where Goku just beats Frieza, because Frieza basically beat himself by cutting himself in half. And then ultimately he uses Goku's own power against Goku, which Goku ultimately had to fire it back at Frieza, and Frieza was basically taken out of commission until later on. But for the battle itself and for the level of mental toughness that Goku had to display to even last this long against Frieza, this ultimately had to come into our #1 spot on this list.